Howdy, folks. All right, we're starting our first actual product. We're going to make a potholder. Yay. All right, I found some nice, fun, colorful yarn here that we're going to use. And this is a thinner yarn. So I'm going to be using a smaller hook. This is a 4.5 millimeter hook right here. First thing that we're going to do is create a loop at the end of our yarn and then create a chain stitch to be the width of the project that we want it to be. Hello and welcome to your first project. All right, what we're going to do is just make a nice, simple, flat potholder, about 8 inches by 8 inches square. Now I found some silly, colorful yarn here that we're going to use for this project. And because this is a yarn that is a relatively thin yarn, I'm going to be using a relatively thin needle. This is a 4.5 millimeter crochet needle right here. And the first thing that we're going to do with our yarn is to create a loop at the end of it. And if you remember from one of the previous videos, the way to create a loop at the end, wrap it around your finger twice, grab the back loop, bring it over, and then grab the back loop, which is now, and then pull that one over again, but all the way to over the top of your finger. And then it creates this nice little loop. Snug that up a little bit, put your hook in there, and then we're ready to go. Now, chain stitch. You should know chain stitch from one of the other videos as well. So we're going to take this needle, create your comfort zone with this yarn and needle. So with this one, I'm able to twist that around. With this side, I'm going to grab the yarn around my index finger here, use the remainder of my fingers to kind of hold this project steady like that. And then chain stitch. So grab it around the needle, pull it through. Grab it around the needle, pull it through. This does not need to be a super snug stitch. Do not pull it really tight. It's not going to work well if it is that snug because of the other stitches that are going to be piled in behind it. So we're just going to keep doing this and making a chain stitch until we have the width of our project ready to go. We now have the chain stitch that we have made for our project, which is going to be this little potholder. And it's about the width that we want it to be. Again, the excess over here, do not worry about that. That gets cut off later. So we have our chain. And what we're going to do, we're going to come back along the chain to make the stitches. So as I'm holding it in the same manner that I've done, create the yarn here. I have it around my index finger. I'm using my other fingers to hold the rest of our project down here. And then my right hand, I'm right-handed, so my right hand uses the needle and it can twist and turn and slide and do everything that it needs to do. Now, because we're going to be working back along our chain, we're going to be starting on the next loop and then working our way back to that loop and then to this loop and then to that loop and all the way back along our chain. But because this is the exact width that we want right now, if we're going to be using a double stitch for this, then what we need to do is do 2 additional chains. We're still going to loop it back through that first hole, but we're going to have 2 more chains that we tie out through here, like so. And those 2 chains, in theory, are going to be the vertical aspect going back up and working back. So we could use, and we have those other stitches that were covered in the other videos, single stitch, double stitch, and triple stitch. But we're just going to use a double stitch, common, standard, easy double stitch, the one you see almost everywhere, to make the rest of this project. So we've already gone up 2 chains. We're going to wrap the yarn around the needle once, and that's to get our 2 loops. That's how we're going to make it a double. So I'm just using my thumb to kind of keep a tab on this, but we're going back through that original hole in the chain that we had identified, pull it back through. Now we've got 3 loops, but that's what we need for our double stitch. Wrap the yarn once, go through 2 loops. Wrap the yarn once, oops, and go through 2 loops. You got a stray yarn in there, stray thread. All right, so we've made one double stitch. We're going to keep going. So one loop over the needle, put that through the next hole in our chain, pull that yarn back through, and now we have our 3 loops. Grab the yarn, 2 loops. Grab the yarn, 2 loops. And we've got our double stitch. And we're going to keep continuing the double stitch all the way back along this chain until we get to the very beginning. Like so. One loop, push it through the chain, through 2 loops, and through 2 loops. Okay, after we kind of snug this down and show you, we've got a bunch of double stitches, and we're going to go all the way back along the chain until we're done with that first row. All right, I've just finished my first row with the simple double stitch. I put it into the last chain. Again, this knot and this excess does not concern me right now. So what we're going to do is turn our work to start the second row. What we do is turn this sucker around like that, and we're going to work backwards in the same fashion. Now notice I'm going to hold this exactly the same manner that I always have. So I've got the thread around my index finger here. I'm using my other fingers to hold the remainder of our work, just to guide it, and then my right hand is free to actually use the needle and do what we need to do with it. Okay, so we just turned our work, but before we start in on the second row, we need to do, because this is a double stitch, we need to do 2 chains, double chain. That's the part that goes up right there. And then we're going to continue and work back along this row to create our second row. And where do you actually put the needle and the yarn? What you're going to see here with this type of a double stitch is that right on top of each stitch is a pretty good sized hole that you can see. Okay, it's in those holes that we're going to be putting the needle to create our next stitch. Now, this double chain that I've put here at the end, that's the one vertical piece that's already established at this point, and we're going to be putting the needle in that hole right there on top of the other stitches. So, double stitch, so I wrap the needle once, or the yarn once. I have 2 loops around my needle now, and I'm going to go back into that little hole that we've created by the stitch. Pull this back now. Still go through, grab the yarn, and pull it back out again. Okay, we have our 3 loops around our needle now, which is exactly what we need for the double stitch. So wrap the yarn, pull it through 2 loops. Wrap the yarn over the needle, pull it through 2 loops. Now we've got the chain stitch that we've created for our first vertical piece of this row, and then a double stitch going into that hole created at the top of each stitch. The next stitch is going to go right here in this hole. Put our yarn around our needle, snug it up. We're doing a double stitch, so 1 loop over. I'm going to use my thumb just to back this off. And then we put that in that hole right there. That's already been created. Wrap the yarn and grab it with that needle. And there we have our 3 loops again. So around the needle, through 2 loops, around the needle, through 2 loops. And then we keep going along this row in those little holes that we've created by these stitches. 1 loop in that hole in the project, and then wrap the yarn through 2 loops, wrap the yarn through 2 loops. As this ekes out, it's going to be a nice smooth pattern going all the way. Okay, so we're going to continue finding those holes and stitching along, making a double stitch the entire way until we get to the other end of the potholder of our project.